Brandon Sanderson is in damage control mode, and he's going to left-wing media outlets of all places to try to quell the backlash that he is facing for promoting disgusting, evil agendas in his latest Wind and Truth book. John De La Rose wrote this up over at fanimpulse.com. You can find the link in the description below. Let's get right into this right here. Sanderson ran to Polygon to try to basically change the narrative that has been built up around him because of his own actions regarding his embrace of transgenderism and the LGBTQ plus agenda. He was kind of talking about whether or not he's going to adapt any of his books. And in the midst of this, he basically calls out that recent Hollywood adaptations of fantasy have been absolutely abysmal, like The Wheel of Time and Rings of Power. Interestingly enough, though, he doesn't actually call out one of the main reasons why is because they have been pushing the LGBTQ plus agenda in these shows, as well as pushing a DEI agenda. They've been pushing various woke ideologies, the various tentacles of wokeism, whether that be the LGBTQ plus agenda, whether that be critical race theory with DEI, etc. So, as John rightfully points out here, this whole interview, the object is to get the discussion of him off of homosexuality in Wind of Truth. I 100% agree with that, and that's why he's going to an outlet like Polygon, who are known for being sympathetic to that disordered behavior that should never be tolerated. But this is what he said. Let's just go over here. We'll look at it. He's asked this: what would convince you the time was right? What signs are you looking for to do an adaptation? And he says, I don't know. Hopefully I will recognize it when I see it. But the reason I don't know is I'm not convinced that we have hit stability in the streaming market. Streaming is a big problem with epic fantasy, and this has me worried. Rings of Power and Wheel of Time have not gone as well as I would have hoped. Shadow and Bone lasted only 2 seasons after a very strong first season. Streaming hasn't figured out epic fantasy yet. And he goes on and says, maybe this is a holdover from network television days. He's basically talking about how they're formatting it, filming an 8-hour movie and showing it in chunks rather than trying to fit it in the old school episodic television format. So he's trying to say that, oh, it's the formatting issue is the real problem, et cetera, et cetera. He says we haven't seen anything decent since the early and mid seasons of Game of Thrones. He does point out, he says Arcane is one of the good fantasy shows, but its budget is just absolutely insane, and no one can really do that unless they have League of Legends and Riot behind it. And then, so that's basically what he's saying here. He's not actually addressing the elephant in the room, as John points out in his article here. Doesn't address it at all. He later was asked this: leaving aside everything else, budget, adaptation concerns, directors, the platform, if you could only adapt one of your projects with a guarantee that it would come out the way you wanted, which story would you most want to see on the screen? He obviously points to Stormlight Archive, but then he says, I mean, the ring, and talks about how he would get an unlimited budget, could do anything he wanted, had creative control, and he says that Rings of Power actually had that, and it's not good. He says the Rings of Power essentially had that, and it's not very good. It's fine, but is it the thing that you want? I mean, I really think the key member is that visionary filmmaker. Epic fantasy has responded poorly to too much oversight from above. So he's claiming that it's too much oversight from above. And he says, I think that was The Witcher's problem. You had that visionary. It was Henry Cavill, and they didn't want to listen to him. So, well, there you go. And he previously talked about how Lord of the Rings had it with Peter Jackson and Denis Villeneuve had it, or Dune had it with Denis Villeneuve. I'm not sure if I 100% agree with that, given what I heard about what he did to Chani in the second film. I actually haven't gone to see that one because of all of this stuff that it sounded like he was changing for that film. And I've seen some clips, and they're not very good. They're not very good. But yeah, this is what Brandon Sanderson is doing. He's not addressing the elephant in the room. He's not talking about one of the main reasons why people are not watching these shows, because they are not staying true to the source material. They're inserting all of these wokeisms, these woke ideologies, whether it be, like I said, critical race theory. You get that with both The Wheel of Time and with The Rings of Power, especially with their casting and all the stuff that they're doing there. And then obviously the LGBTQ plus agenda is very, very in front of your face with the Wheel of Time. Not as much so with the Rings of Power, although they have made discussion about that in their various press interviews, which I think turns people off as well, because if you're talking about it, there's likely something in there, and people just are not interested in seeing that stuff at all. I also think that there's a really good point here that John puts here. Isaac Young notes this. He says, the oversight doesn't matter. The West has destroyed the very things that would give a visionary vision. We can't do fantasy anymore because fantasy belongs to a particular people and place, and we have undermined that concept for decades. And I think there's something true to that. I know if you've been watching this channel and watching me for any significant period of time, you know I like to cite Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, where he talks about the pinnacle of fairy stories is the eucatastrophe, and that eucatastrophe is getting a glimpse of evangelium, right? Getting a glimpse of heaven, pointing you towards heaven, and that is the pinnacle of a fairy story, such as the Lord of the Rings, such as any of these kind of big fantasy projects. And you can't really be pointing people towards heaven. You can't really be providing people a glimpse of evangelium when you are promoting homosexuality, when you are promoting transgenderism, when you are promoting critical race theory, when you are promoting Marxism, when you are promoting communism, where you're promoting all of these kind of evils and trying to depict them as good. You aren't going to get that. So I think Isaac Young is 100% right here in his observation that we have destroyed these very things. We've destroyed them by abandoning God, abandoning Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. And that's why the fantasy things we see now do not do well. They aren't good. They always turn to crap, even if they might entice people. Like, you can look at Game of Thrones and how that definitely did entice people. It was a massive juggernaut. But at the end of the day, what is its legacy? Its legacy is that it's abysmal, and it was terrible, and it was a failure, and everyone wanted it remade. It's because it doesn't give you that glimpse of evangelium. And it can have all of the debauchery and degeneracy that it shows. Now, I think some of the stuff, it obviously, the way it depicts it is clearly done for like titillation purposes and things like that. But I'm not necessarily against having it depicted. I mean, this is what I forget which Pope Pius said this, but he writes this in Inter Mirifica, this document. It's like you can show the ugly side of humanity in order to kind of teach lessons, right? And this is how I've always said that the way you salvage Game of Thrones, the way you kind of do provide that potential glimpse of evangelium, is you have to treat it as a tragedy. All of these people lose because they don't come together. Their sins, all of these various other sins that they commit, whether it's pride, whether it's lust, whether it's gluttony, all of those big 7 deadly sins, they also have disunity, and they can't come together. And then so the Night King, and I'm just talking about the TV show here, the Night King comes in and wins and kills them all. And they all die, and they all lose because they failed to come together. They abandoned what made their kingdoms great in the first place. And I think that's how you kind of salvage that. So you can have all of this awful, terrible stuff, but at the end of the day, you show that stuff as awful and terrible, and you pay the consequences for that. And that's basic Greek tragedy, right? Flying too close to the sun, burning up, right? So that I think Isaac Young is absolutely right here. Brandon Sanderson clearly running to Polygon to try and deflect from the criticisms he's facing, and really all it's doing is it's, I think, allowing us to show that that's exactly what he's doing, because even in his criticisms here of Wheel of Time, of Rings of Power, of Hollywood fantasy, he obviously does avoid any kind of discussion about the agenda pushing, which is, I think, definitely one of the main reasons why this stuff is failing. Because at the same time, the reason why they are pushing, the reason why a lot of this stuff is against the source material is because they're trying to push the agenda, because they don't actually like the source material at all. They want to subvert it. But this is the latest on Brandon Sanderson. He's running to Polygon, trying to do damage control, providing mediocre criticisms of these fantasy shows, Wheel of Time and Rings of Power, in order to deflect from the criticisms he's facing, and rightfully so. And then obviously some great response here from Isaac Young. I'll just read it again. The oversight doesn't matter. The West has destroyed the very things that would give a visionary vision. We can't do fantasy anymore because fantasy belongs to a particular people and place, and we have undermined that concept for decades. Let that sink in. But let me know what you guys make of what Brandon Sanderson had to say here in this interview with Polygon. Let me know in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable, especially to each other, and to always, always speak the truth. And never forget that everything woke turns to crap.